What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Blue Blood Sports TV, back at y'all with another one. So, the longest reigning champion in the sport of boxing currently right now as it stands is WBC featherweight world champion superstar boxer, Mr. Gary Russell Jr. With that said, Mr. Gary Russell Jr., he did an interview. His brother was boxing, and Gary Russell Jr. was asked obviously about his future and what does Gary Russell Jr. have going on next. And Gary Russell Jr., he took the opportunity to absolutely go in on a few boxers. In particular, two that stood out to me was former WBO featherweight world champion turned lightweight, junior lightweight title contender, and that being Shakur Stevenson, Olympic silver medalist. And he took the opportunity once again to go in on legendary, iconic, retired Hall of Fame superstar boxer turned promoter and Floyd Money Mayweather. With that said, he said that Floyd Mayweather gave the sport of boxing a black eye with his exhibition bout against Logan Paul, YouTuber, and he didn't perform. He didn't put on. So he said that, you know, he made us boxers look absolutely weak. The fact that he didn't put on against a YouTuber. He says that we got to stop the money grabs within the sport of boxing. It's watering down the sport of boxing. Now that I agree with. But what I will say is that Floyd Mayweather's retired. Exhibition bouts is expected. If he could make tens of millions of dollars and still do a million pay-per-views, and he's doing so in, what was it, 8 2-minute round exhibition bouts against Logan Paul, a YouTube sensation, why not? It's been done before. Muhammad Ali did it. Sugar Ray Robinson did it. George Foreman did it. You know, plenty of boxers in the past have done it. Legendaries, iconics in the sport of boxing. Plenty of them have done this in the past. When it comes to Shakur Stevenson, Mr. Gary Russell Jr. said that Shakur Stevenson absolutely wants no smoke with him, right? He said, I was calling out Shakur Stevenson when he was the champion, and he was the WBO champion for a unification bout, and he danced around me. He called out every and anybody other than myself, and that's a fight that I was looking for. Gary Russell, you know, at this gesture in his career, he needs to put the pedal to the gas, okay? Gary Russell, we know he states that these guys don't want to fight him. He can't get these big fights, you know, but, you know, Gary Russell is short on time, okay? Now, he stays in shape. He's a southpaw. He's very athletic. And he also took the opportunity to go into rival foe, Olympic two-time gold medalist, superstar boxer, Vasil High-Tech Lomachenko. He took the opportunity to go in on Lomachenko as well. Obviously, that's not a surprise, you know. And, you know, Gary Russell Jr. relationship with Floyd Mayweather is essentially strained, you know. So it's not a surprise to see him going in on Floyd Mayweather. What is a surprise was him going in on Shakur Stevenson. And also he said that Devin Haney, undefeated WBC lightweight world champion superstar boxer, and his father, trainer, and manager, Bill Haney, continue not to send him the proper contracts, okay? And my thing with that is, at this point in Gary Russell's career, if Bill Haney and Devin Haney aren't sending the proper contracts, then you draw up the contract and you send them the contract. What are you waiting for? So you're sitting idle and you're waiting for them to draw up a contract to give to you so that you can fight a guy that's 22 years of age. He's 22, okay? Gary Russell Jr. is not 22. Gary Russell Jr., 31 wins, 1 loss, no draws, 18 big wins by way of knockout. He stands at 5'4" with a 64-inch arm reach, okay? Gary Russell Jr., is no spring chicken. Okay, time is not on his side. He's going on 34 years of age. He's 33 going on 34 years of age. So if Bill Haney and Devin Haney haven't drawn up the proper contract to give to Gary Russell Jr., well, then Gary Russell Jr. should be drawing up a contract. He's the vet. He's the A side. He's the bigger draw. He should be drawing up the contract, right? He's the longest reigning champion in the sport of boxing. So, yeah, Gary Russell Jr. he's fighting once a year. But Gary Russell Jr. has to take accountability as well for fighting once a year. Because at this gesture in his career, he shouldn't be waiting for 22-year-old Devin Haney to draw up a proper contract to make a big fight between the two. Or he's saying that he wants to fight undefeated 3-division world champion superstar boxer who simultaneously holds the WBA super champion at 130 and regular champion at 135 and 140 in Gervonta Tank Davis, who's a pay-per-view star. Again, Gervonta Tank Davis, 25 wins, no losses, no draws, 24 big wins by way of knockout. Gervonta Tank Davis is 26 years of age, stands at 5'5" with a 67-inch arm reach. So, again, you're waiting for Gervonta. Now, in the case of Gervonta Tank Davis is a pay-per-view star. But the problem is, Gervonta Tank Davis, he operates and moves to the drum of Floyd Mayweather's beat. And because your relationship is strained with Floyd Mayweather, well, it's abundantly clear Floyd Mayweather's not going to make that fight happen. That would be definitely a huge fight, as Gervonta Tank Davis is from Baltimore. Gary Russell Jr. is from D.C. You have the DMV rivalry. Huge fight. Absolutely. Mega fight. But again, Gary Russell Jr. relationship with Floyd Mayweather is strained. Floyd Mayweather's not going to make that fight happen. And Gervonta Tank Davis is not going to negotiate with Gary Russell Jr. So that fight is essentially dead in the water. And like I said, when it comes to Devin Haney, 22 years of age, Devin Haney and Gary Russell Jr. should be negotiating. But if they sending you a contract and the contract is not proper, then you, the vet, needs to be sending a proper contract to make the fight happen. And as far as it goes with Shakur Stevenson is looking to make the biggest fights possible. I don't believe for a second that Shakur Stevenson is hesitating to make a fight happen with Gary Russell Jr. But you have to understand, Shakur Stevenson, very, very young, very early in his career, and he has a promoter. Unlike Devin Haney is his own promoter, DHP Promotions, his father, trainer, and manager, and they co-promote with Matchroom CEO and promoter Eddie Hearn. But again, they are their own promoter. Shakur Stevenson is a young, up-and-coming fighter, but Shakur Stevenson has a promoter. Shakur Stevenson can't just say up and negotiate with Gary Russell Jr. Okay? That's not going to happen because at the end of the day, Bob Arum has the last say-so when it comes to Shakur Stevenson, and Shakur Stevenson is so now he's a year older than Devin Haney, but again, he's not a free agent. He doesn't move to the drum of his own beat. He's not his own promoter. He has a promoter. Shakur Stevenson has to, at the end of the day, Bob Arum has the last word when it comes to who Shakur Stevenson fights, when they fight him, and how they fight him. Now, Shakur Stevenson is never short on words. Shakur Stevenson is very business-minded, and he'll push for certain fights like he does with the Oscar Valdez fight and the Jamel Herring fight. But the thing is, Shakur Stevenson can get away with pushing for those fights to happen because those guys are signed to Top Rank. Shakur Stevenson, 16 wins, no losses, no draws, 8 wins by way of knockout. And Shakur Stevenson, 24 years of age, 5'7" with a 68-inch arm reach. Shakur Stevenson will be facing off against WBO junior lightweight world champion, superstar boxer Jamel Herring. That's scheduled to probably take place in October, November sometimes, okay, in Atlanta. It's going to be huge in Atlanta. So these guys are these young guys are making these fights happen early in their career. Teofimo Lopez, another guy. 3 big back-to-back fights. Nakatani, Richie Comey for the IBF title, then a unification bout with Vasyl Lomachenko, in which he was victorious against Lomachenko. Okay, so these guys are fighting each other, right? And these are guys that Gary Russell Jr. is 10 years older than most of these guys. So Shakur Stevenson, you can't blame Shakur Stevenson. Shakur Stevenson can say he wants to fight Gary Russell Jr. all he wants, but that's a co-promotion fight, right? Where you got to get Bob Arum. It has to be, what does Bob Arum get out of the deal, right? It has to be lucrative for Bob Arum, Top Rank, and ESPN to do a joint deal with Gary Russell Jr. for a Shakur Stevenson fight. I think that Gary Russell Jr. is sitting too idle on his hands and just being he's just being complacent with the fact that he's calling out these fighters and these fighters are not responding, and he's saying, oh, see, these guys don't want to fight me, they're avoiding me. No, they're not avoiding you. It's the business of boxing. It's the business of boxing that allows you to be avoided, right? Again, the fight with Devin Haney, they sent you 2 contracts that wasn't lucrative to you, right? It wasn't conducive to what you want. Cool. So it's time for you to say, you know something? This is not going to work. I don't like this contract. So you know what we're going to do? I'm going to draw up a contract with the proper wording that I'm looking for, right? Because he didn't say the money wasn't there. He just said the contract wasn't right. So I'm going to draw up the proper contract, and we're going to make this happen. Plain and simple. You're waiting for a 22-year-old Devin Haney to draw up a contract and send it to you, and if they haven't done it correctly twice, then what are you waiting for? There's nothing for Gary Russell to be waiting for. He's too complacent with just saying, calling out the fighters, and the fighters are not responding. If I don't have to fight Gary Russell Jr., and Gary Russell Jr. is not going to put the pedal to the metal to force the fight, then why am I making it happen? We need to see the best fight the best, and we need Gary Russell Jr. to put a pedal to the metal, right? So when you're saying Shakur Stevenson, Gary Russell Jr. is not allowing the relationship to mend with himself and Floyd Mayweather, and Floyd Mayweather is very close to Al Heyman. So the Gervonta Tank Davis fight is not going to happen, right? He's not being forceful when it comes to Devin Haney situation, and when it comes to Shakur Stevenson has to, he still has to answer the Top Rank and Bob Arum early in his career. Gervonta Tank Davis is not going to go against Floyd Mayweather and force a fight with Gary Russell. Shakur Stevenson, Bob Arum has the last word with him. And Gary Russell Jr. is not forcing the fight with Devin Haney, because he can. If right now he says, you know something, you guys are not sending over the proper contract, I'm going to send over the contract. And he's not doing that. He's just continuing to be complacent with, they continue to send me the wrong contract. So they're not really trying to fight. Well, then you can look at it as a glass half full. What is your counter? If you're not countering the contract, then maybe you don't want to fight. Gary Russell Jr.'s last fight was against King Tug. That's a long time ago. So he's fighting once a year, and you know, he continues to say, you know, guys like Terrence Crawford at 147, he called him out to make a fight happen. Terrence Crawford don't want to make it happen. Maybe that's not realistic for Terrence Crawford to fight a guy coming from 126 pounds, 21 pounds north. At what does Terrence Crawford get out of that? Nothing. So Oscar Valdez, Miguel Berchelt, these guys are fighting each other. They're maneuvering around Gary Russell Jr., and he's allowing himself to be maneuvered around. That's all I got for y'all. Make sure you hit the like button. Drop a comment in the comment section. Let me know what y'all think. Y'all already know what it is. It's your boy Blue, Blue Blood Sports TV. Hate, like, comment, and subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the bell icon to get all the new notifications. Follow me on Instagram at Blue Blood Sports TV, all one word. Y'all already know what it is. Shouts out to the entire LDBC. Shouts out to New Media. Shouts out to Black Media Raw. Make sure you like and share these videos. That's all I got for y'all. Peace.